Now, I can't help thinking that this scene really could come up, and it could be the gateway, if you pardon the expression, to a section B, either about fathers or about the next world. I can't help noticing as well, and I think this would be my starter on it, is that what's surprising about Hamlet, the character, and also the play, is when you look at this speech, it's remarkable how the extent to which Hamlet sees the world in the same way as his father does. When you look at this speech, you'll notice immediately from word 3 the ghost's preoccupation not only with the fact that he's been done a political and human wrong, but also a sexual one. It's almost like he's been cuckolded. So look at the sexually charged words. Incestuous, adulterate, from the lexical field of action, lust, and also, well, we'll see it later, the word will, lewdness, garbage, as in filth, and then back to incest. We'll notice that the ghost is a very repetitious character. Luxury, again, that idea of something that gets in the way of duty. So he is at the top and tail of this speech, preoccupied with beds and lust and his brother's disgusting incestuous actions. Now, he is so preoccupied with that he almost forgets to do his narrative, and he has one of those actually tricks where we have we have two hypometric lines here, and it's almost as though the king is so the ghost is so traumatized by what he's got to say that he has to draw breath and leave those 4 syllables, or 5 syllables. Pray on garbage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all my smooth body, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he leaves 5 syllables there in a kind of rhythm. And at one point, he is so prompted by the short stay he's got in the midnight hour that he actually gets onto the narrative. And here, so before he gets on with the narrative, we have this almost meditation on lust, and the yes, the will here, that is another that joins the lexical field of desire. If you're interested in that kind of thing. And then look at this word here, the will, the desire, of my most seeming virtuous queen. Now that's rather long for a line of pentameter. It's about 2 syllables too long. That is hypermetric. So it's almost as if he can't fit his shock into a single line. The will of my most seeming, actually no, it does work. The will of my most seeming virtuous queen. But seeming, I know not seems, that's Hamlet's line as well. So both Hamlet and his father, the ghost, are quite used to trying at least to look beyond the apparent, the superficial. Now, notice as well his tendency to interrupt himself and to change subject, often flagged up by something that isn't even verbal. Oh, wicked wit and gifts, apostrophizing there. Oh, Hamlet, not apostrophizing, but using the vocative there to approach Hamlet. What a falling off was there. If I do say so myself, I don't think Claudius is as good a king as I was. But even then, it's almost as though that ought to be a political remark, but look at how quickly he goes straight back into love and sex. It's almost as though Claudius's crime is not so much to have let the country down as to have been a lousy husband and an unworthy replacement in the bed that old Hamlet once occupied, whose love was of that dignity that it went hand in hand even with the vow I made to her in marriage. That is the kind of thing. Remember, that comes up at some length in the mousetrap scene, Act 3, Scene 3, where the the queen actually says that the player queen protests too much in saying, "I will never take another husband, even if you die." And it turns out not to be true. And then the ghost has a kind of meditation on virtue. Virtue itself, you would have thought, would not yield, even if the devil assumed a pleasing shape, though lewdness caught it in the shape of heaven. Nonetheless, it ought not to end in a bed, but somehow in the person of the queen it does. So, but though to a radiant angel linked, will consort, resort itself in a celestial bed and prey on garbage. Note that juxtaposition, that contrast between what virtue thinks it's doing and where it ends up. And that very brutal dismissal of the world, or the bed rather, in which both his queen and brother end up. Now, so much for that. What follows next is narrative. Now, you would expect, and to some extent you get, a narrative to be lots of subject, verb, object, past tense, this happened, then that happened. But notice the poetical excursions through which old Hamlet sends us. And we'll look at some of the curious reflections. To a certain extent, we get safe, straight narrative. Sleeping with my orchard, my custom always of the afternoon, upon my secure hour, by uncle stole, with juice of cursed Habona in a vial, and in the porches of my ears did pour the leprous distilment. That's the plot. That's it. He poisoned me through the ear. Now, and then he could just say, which killed me, but he doesn't. Whose effect holds such an enmity with blood of man, that swift as quicksilver it courses through the natural gates and alleys of the body. Now, again, it's worth seeing the ear here as a gateway, as a portal. And the contamination that courses through the whole body to be an almost spiritual one, if you imagine it with words. But here, the very physical language suggests that we're very much in a world which values, or that sees the world in terms of bodies and bits of bodies. So the ear is the start. And then, quite a curious thing, and it's probably worth mentioning what happens in the F text here. And with a sudden vigour, it doth possess, as in, so if you're going with Q2 and possess, you're thinking almost of that spiritual sense of the devil taking over. Actually, F has posset. Now, babies, if they've had too much milk, they throw it up, and we call that that extra milk, that spilling out of it, we call it posset. So actually, F has a much more physical reading of that. It does posset and curdle, that is to say, like eager droppings into milk, the thin and wholesome blood. Now, poetic and reflective and abstract though the ghost is, it's worth listening to, and that's the word. It's worth listening to just how physical, almost medical his language is. So did it mine. So he's extrapolating from the general to his own case. That's what it happened, and that's how it was with me. And then he compares himself to a leper, and a most instant tetter barked about most laser-like, with vile and loathsome crust all my smooth body. And then again, perhaps recoiling in disgust from the physical nature of what he's just said, much as he did with this word garbage, he pauses again. Now, reflective as he is, he then comes to consider the implications of that murder. And it's worth thinking about the way he does it. He thinks through this stuff a lot. After all, as a dead person, he's got all of eternity ahead of him to think about this, and he really does. Look at what he says. Thus was I sleeping by a brother's hand, of life, of crown, of queen at once dispatched. Now, it's worth knowing that this device is called zeugma, meaning a yoking together, or silipsis, meaning a taking up together with. And what that means is that you've got one verb, dispatched, but it's got, and I know it's passive, but it's governed by three subjects: of life, of crown, of queen at once dispatched. So he's lost his life, he's lost his crown, he's lost his queen. And what you see there again is of him linking the spiritual life, the political, the crown, and the sexual, the queen. His marital status is as well compromised. And in that 10 syllables, he manages to take stock of everything he's lost. Or does he? No. There's something else he needs to consider. Cut off even in the blossom of my sin. Now remember, it's worth remembering here, when Hamlet is about to kill Claudius, he thinks, actually, I'd better not do it now while he's praying in case he goes to heaven. It's the same of old Hamlet. Old Hamlet is killed when he has not prayed. He's even in the blossoms of his sin. Unhouselled, disappointed, unannealed. Now, if this passage comes up, and I do think it really might, it's worth knowing what all of those words mean. Unhouselled, housel is a word for Holy Communion, and it means that the old king has died without taking that last communion. And the disappointed and unannealed means without having had the extreme unction, the last rites, and disappointed is as well. So those is not quite ready, not made fit for death, not appointed for the end. So you have to see these three words in that very Roman Catholic sense of taking the last rites and of being made fit for heaven. And just as Claudius, the old Hamlet here feels he has not been made ready. Claudius, in contrast, you might say, is not prepared to renounce the trappings of his sin. At least old Hamlet is, and so we can, if we want, admire him for that. No reckoning made, but sent to my account with all my imperfections on my head. So he's actually repeated that point. And while we're on repetition, oh horrible, most horrible. And just as he's broken down in these earlier lines, so here he actually stops being rational. He is simply recoiling. If you think about what horrible means or what horrid is, it comes from the Latin meaning to bristle. To have that bristling, that involuntary, almost goosebumps, from which he suffers. So he's talking, much as the rest of his body has suffered from death, and much as he's talked about Hamlet's hairs possibly rising up like the fearful porpentine. So here he's anticipating the kind of shudders and hair standing on end that his story will impart. If thou hast nature in thee, bear it not. And then he's straight back to the sex. Let not the royal bed of Denmark be a couch for luxury and damned incest, which we've covered. After this, we do have, and it comes up, and Hamlet is. I don't think Hamlet really obeys this injunction, but you might disagree. It is very important for the ghost that Hamlet's feelings of enmity, of anger, of disgust are aimed solely at Claudius, solely at the uncle, rather than at Gertrude. Leave her to heaven, and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. Fare thee well at once. And here the ghost prepares to exit and end his speech. The glowworm shows the matin to be near. He also speaks that poetic language of morning and of sunrise, but for him it's a kind of sunset. It's his last chance to impart his words to Hamlet, except when he speaks them from underneath the stage, as if from the darkness through which he walks.